Hey everyone, so One Piece chapter 1084 just came out, and last chapter, chapter 1083, I referred to that as the chapter before the chapter. Reason being, I expected, with the way that chapter ended, that we would be seeing Im and a full face reveal for him within the next few chapters, probably this chapter. So, this chapter, 1084, we did get Im. We did get Im, which was expected. The face reveal Oda is still saving, which I think is good in the long run, because this is the character that I think has been the single most anticipated character, to get a reveal for in One Piece in a long time. Maybe ever, maybe in One Piece history, and I think that the longer that Oda draws it out, the longer that Oda keeps adding to the sense of mystery, the ominous aura around Im, the better it will be in terms of the final impact when we get the full reveal of who is probably going to be the final antagonist of One Piece, and probably the most important antagonist in One Piece, maybe tied with Blackbeard. So, I think the way that Oda is doing all of the lead up towards Im has been fantastic so far. Really, every chapter that we've ever had focused on the Reverie, both pre-Wano and now post-Wano, has been fantastic, and so much of it goes to that sense of mystery of what is lurking behind the shadows. So I think in terms of just giving a sort of dramatic feel to every time that Im is on page, on panel, Oda has been knocking it out of the park so far. I can't remember the last time I felt this much anticipation for finding out the full, the full story, the full reveal, the full design of a One Piece villain. I think even Kaido, I didn't feel that way leading up to Kaido, although Kaido's introduction was fittingly iconic for the stature of villain that he ended up becoming. Now, in terms of what we learned about in this chapter, so there's three major theories that I've seen floating around, and I think that they all have different levels of potential, I suppose. There is I mostly just want to talk about in this chapter, by the way. I know that other things happened. Sabo met Bonnie. That was kind of just, that's cool that they met each other, that they exchanged, they exchanged phone numbers. They're like, you go do this, you go do that, whatever. Cool. I think that was basically checking off a box of what needed to be established, that, hey, this is what happened pre-Egghead Island, just so you guys know, but it wasn't anything, it wasn't anything too important, right? Confirms why Bonnie left the Reverie, why she chose to divert her attention to Vegapunk instead, trusting the revolutionaries for that. It establishes that there's a connection between Sabo and Bonnie. That's good to know. I wonder how well, I don't think Bonnie knows that Luffy is Sabo's brother, unless I'm forgetting something, so maybe that little connection will come into play later on with Bonnie trusting Luffy trusting, he already trusts Bonnie. You know what I mean? I feel like there's a conversation to be had there that could lead to some tighter connections, but we'll get to that stuff later. Alright, Bonnie stuff happened. The Sai and Leo scene, we'll talk about that at the end, but mainly I want to talk about the scene with Im, okay? So, King Cobra has seemed to have realized that in the twilight of his life, he is old, he is sick, he is set to die soon, he has nothing to lose, right? When he went to the Gorosei and started hitting them with the questions he was hitting them with, in my mind I was like, okay, so King Cobra is suicidal. This is absolutely crazy. But the more I thought about it, the more I realized that, okay, well, if there's any time to start asking the big questions, why not do it now when he's basically at the end of his life anyway? I don't think that's necessarily what King Cobra is thinking, but I'm just like, well, he's playing with house money at this point. Maybe this is the right time to do it. He hasn't asked this stuff in previous reveries. He didn't ask that, the previous reverie, as far as we know. He didn't ask that at the reverie that we saw with him, Wapol, and Child Vivi, I think 8 years back or so. I think around that time. This reverie, he's chosen to do it. So I do wonder if maybe it's an unspoken thing or something like that, but the reason that Cobra might be asking might be because of just his age and him not getting a chance to do so again. Well, his age plus his illness. The other possibility is also just that the conversations that he had with Nico Robin, the reveals with the Poneglyph and everything like that, the experiences in Alabasta, leading him to be more curious about the Will of D and everything that goes with it. So, we have that. Cobra, I think you can't give him enough props. I maintain that out of all of the kings that we have seen in One Piece so far, I think Cobra, in terms of prominent nations, right? Actual leaders of nations and everything like that. I think Cobra remains the best example of what a king should be. I think Riku's heart was definitely in the right place, and he did a lot of good for Dressrosa, but I think Cobra was... Maybe it's hard to fault, who could have stopped everything that happened in Dressrosa or whatever. And Cobra obviously went through a near identical scenario. He could have been living at the same reality as Riku was, but at the end of the day, he didn't. I think character-wise, Cobra has always seemed more impressive to me and just the ideal version of a monarch in many ways. So, good stuff with Cobra, but really, let's talk about what he's talking about. So, the three possibilities, right? We get the breakdown. Right, we get the breakdown. 20 nations united form the world government. The sovereigns of each nation place their swords in front of the throne to basically say, we're not going to rule this. We're all just going to be individual nations that are allied under one banner, essentially, so that none of us have absolute power. Cool. One defects, nation of Alabasta. She heads home. I like to think that okay, well, we can't read too much into the motivations. I'll get to why that is in a second, right? So she seems to head home. Something happens along the way. So the Alabasta, the nation of Alabasta, is ruled by Lily's younger brother in the following years. What happened along the way? There's some hint left behind through a letter that was penned to Alabasta. What happened along the way? So there's 3 possibilities that came out of this that I think are all very, very, very interesting. All right, so one is the most likely. I would say it's the most likely simply because it's the most straightforward. The ruler that we have today, right? The ruler, I don't know why I'm calling him the ruler, Im. Im was unhappy with Lily leaving, and so Im did something along the way. Catastrophe struck her under mysterious circumstances, and she was erased from history, right? As Im is wont to do. I like that. It is the most straightforward. What's interesting about that is that it suggests that maybe there may have been a romance there or something like that, because I think it would be particularly... Well, I don't know if it means that there may have been a romance or not, but maybe Im just wanted to axe her just because he didn't like the idea of someone defecting from his new regime. Or maybe he didn't want the fact that there was a ruler to get out, because maybe Im's existence was a secret even at that time, and known only to the 20 rulers of that time. So that's a possibility. Possibility number 2 is that Lily ended up becoming... that Im is Lily. That is an interesting possibility. It's been long speculated that Im might be a woman. So if we look at it like this, which is 19 rulers placed their swords before the throne, 1 refused to place their sword before the throne. Did that individual ultimately end up, even though she should have gone back to Alabasta, ultimately decide that she's going to take the throne for herself? That's a possibility. So Lily disappeared, but what does that really mean? I would add that the silhouette of Lily that we see while Cobra is talking about her, it does seem a little scary, in a way. I mean, at the end of the day, it's a silhouette. Silhouettes, I suppose, will all look like that, but you could imagine that silhouette ultimately being, that her being Im, right? In terms of, we've seen silhouettes of Im, we've seen silhouettes of her. You could imagine a reality where basically it's meant to be the same character and we just got a glimpse of who Im actually is. That's possibility number 2. I don't think that possibility is that likely as opposed to possibility number 1, but it's there. And it's one of the more, I think it's more interesting than number 1. Then finally, possibility number 3. Possibility number 3, and I saw, this is not an original idea, this is something I've seen people discussing, but I really, really like this idea. I have talked many times about the parallels between Dressrosa and the world at large. How Dressrosa is supposed to mirror the world at large, how Doflamingo's rule in Dressrosa is supposed to mirror the Celestial Dragon's rule in the world at large. The number of references between Dressrosa to how the rest of the world operates is very, very, very explicit and very, very on the nose throughout that arc. So if we go back to the idea of the Doflamingo, what I saw some people discussing was, well, how did Doflamingo really become Doflamingo? His father elected to defect or abdicate the position of Celestial Dragon and just become a normal person, right? Doflamingo doesn't like that, kills his father, and then, while he's not allowed to become a Celestial Dragon after that, he goes and takes power for himself again in the nation of Dressrosa. Interestingly, if we look at this scenario, right? It's really the forming of the original 20 Celestial Dragons, and 1 chooses not to have that power, chooses not to become a Celestial Dragon. I wonder if this is another scenario where perhaps Lily's child does not like that decision, and Lily is killed for that reason. Child goes back, takes their rightful spot, and then ultimately takes even greater power than that and becomes Im. That is also really, really interesting and ties... I think that is maybe the most interesting option. I think option 2, where, Im is Lily, is very interesting. I think option 3, where it's a callback to the Doflamingo scenario, I think that is very symbolically fitting, or at least in terms of parallels and foreshadowing and everything. I do think that with this third option, it would basically mean that, let's say that it was Lily's child making this decision, it would mean that Im, in this case, Im being Lily's child, would have taken power post-war against the D-Clan, which I think it doesn't make as much sense to me, because I would imagine that Im would have been a prime figure in the in the war that happened all those centuries ago. But in this case, Im would actually just be an inheritor of one of the initial celestial dragons and having taken power shortly after that war was won, which would be surprising to me. But I still think that, any of these three options, even if it's just option number one, Im got angry that Lily was leaving, took her out. Maybe it was a romance, maybe he was just angry about it. If Im is Lily herself, or if Im is the child of Lily, I think any of these three options, I think Oda's going to be able to pull out a really good story and hopefully an interesting little backstory in the next chapter. So I don't know if Oda is ready to go back in time that far, but I wouldn't be surprised if we got to see, the same way we got to see a silhouette of Lily this chapter. Maybe we get to see some sort of montage type stuff happening in the background. Kind of like, I think back to when Kinemon was explaining all the way back in, I think it was chapter 920, Kinemon was explaining the siege on Odin's castle, or the burning of Odin's castle and how that went. And we got to see silhouettes of things happening at the time. We got to see silhouettes of King, Queen, and Jack attacking the castle. So maybe we get to see a little bit of that from all the way back in the Void Century here, which obviously I think all of us would be really, really excited by. So, all of that. Cobra's also asking about the Will of D. Good luck getting answers on that. I hope that Im spills some answers, because Im is likely ready to kill King Cobra. And I think the moment that Im took the throne, that means that Im was ready to kill King Cobra, because why? You wouldn't reveal yourself unless you already have decided that this person's life is done for. So, Im stuff aside, I think next chapter is going to be an amazing chapter. Classic Oda taking a break week right after leaving us on a cliffhanger like this, but next week's chapter is going to be absolutely... Next chapter, which is not next week, but 2 weeks from now, is going to be absolutely huge. Lastly, let's talk about Sai, Leo, and the Celestial Dragon. So, Charlos, once again, in an interesting little this whole scene is a throwback to... It's identical to the Sabaody scene in that St. Charlos, untouchable Celestial Dragon, he wants a mermaid, he captures a mermaid. In response, the Straw Hats attack him. Right? Well, Luffy attacks him in Sabaody. In this arc, it is Sai and Leo who are subordinates of Luffy, right? So it's the exact same scenario, right? Charlos wanting a mermaid, the mermaid being friends with Luffy, so Luffy coming in and punching Charlos, which is never supposed to happen. Here, it's Charlos again wanting a mermaid. This time it's the mermaid, the most important mermaid in the world, and Luffy's friends, and this time Luffy's friends come in and stop him. So it's an identical one-to-one scenario. I do wonder if this is the big incident. Is this the incident that was it's not even foreshadowing, the incident that was basically explicitly stated to eventually happen back at the end of Dressrosa when the Grand Fleet was formed? Is this the incident? It would make sense. I think technically it's attacking a Celestial Dragon that is big enough. I do also wonder, it's just something that Luffy has done already, right? That was Luffy's claim to fame. His biggest act of defiance pre-time skip was attacking Celestial Dragon. So I wonder if this one, it's just the same incident again, this time by his subordinates. So it's not really anything new. Luffy's already he's assaulted the Celestial Dragons, is assaulting them again. What does that mean? Does that do anything new? I mean, even in the span of that first incident when Luffy punched Charlos, shortly afterwards, Usopp also straight up fell on a Celestial Dragon, if I remember correctly. So, Luffy's no stranger at this. It's already happened is what I'm saying. So it's kind of like, to me, Luffy shot down the world government flag at Enies Lobby. That crime is already on his resume. The big declaration of war has already happened. Shooting down another flag isn't anything new, as far as I can tell. So I do wonder if this is the major incident that was built up for so long. It also happens in the middle of a chapter rather than the end of a chapter, so it doesn't feel like that big of an incident relative to Luffy hitting the Celestial Dragon the first time. All in all, I mean, it's something that is very taboo. It's not supposed to happen. I just wonder what would be the consequences of this that are new, because the world government should already want Luffy for the crime of attacking a Celestial Dragon. Would his subordinates attacking a Celestial Dragon do anything new? What it could lead to is the world government taking action against the nations that Sai and Leo represent. Maybe against the nation of Dressrosa, I suppose, because Leo's from... I don't know, there's different options there, but at the same time, Mjosgård even says, if I'm pronouncing his name correctly, that I'll take responsibility for it. I don't know how much he's capable of taking responsibility for this, but is there a way that he can kind of absolve them of this crime? I'm not 100% sure what the whole fallout for this is, if it is the incident that was being talked about way back when and this leads to some major world consequence. Sure, that makes sense, it's a celestial dragon. At the same time, I wonder if it is something more that we are yet to see, and this is kind of just a throwback to the previous, Saboti incident that happened, basically just beat by beat replay, and something even bigger is going to happen after this. So, I don't know. The Im stuff is honestly what I'm most interested about from this chapter, but, we gotta wait 2 weeks to find out about that. So if you enjoyed this, then definitely like, comment, and subscribe, and I will talk to you all later.